Fortunately, Chris Ford became the Celtic coach. I tried to recruit him for Coach Litwack at Temple. Stayed in touch with him throughout the summertime. When he got to the job, quickly called. We talked. I went up and talked with everybody else up there. Now I found out what basketball heaven was.
Yeah, well, you went from one absolute extreme to the other. It was incredible.
I didn't know how franchises operated. Met Red Auerbach and Dave Gavitt and Jan Volk, all those people involved with the Celtic organization over the years. I mean, it was like in cruise control. I think I was still in post-traumatic syndrome from the Clippers.
I'm not surprised.
Then you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So we're all getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, you made the pass, yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 76. Thanks for joining me. Today I'm pleased to welcome Don Casey to the show. A big thanks to a great friend of the show, Terence Stansbury, episode 58 of the podcast, for helping us connect. Terence, I always appreciate your support. Don's head coaching career began at the tender age of 21. He enjoyed success in high school before moving into the college coaching ranks at Temple and ultimately was an assistant or head coach in the NBA for almost 20 years with the Bulls, Clippers, Celtics and Nets. This chat was recorded prior to the start of the 2017 NBA season. Towards the end of the episode, I'll share another great podcast review. You can add yours by visiting inallairness.com/review. Stay up to date with my podcast and subscribe to my monthly email newsletter. You'll receive exclusive details on upcoming podcast episodes, future high-profile guests to appear on the show, and plenty more. Simply visit inallairness.com/news. Show notes for this episode, including links to numerous topics covered, are at inallairness.com/76. Now, onto the show. My guest today has been entrenched with the sport of basketball for well over 50 years. He progressed from coaching high school to college and ultimately the NBA, plus has worked with Team USA after his head coaching career had ended. Don Casey, thanks very much for joining me.
Adam, it's a pleasure.
I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. I'd like to thank a good friend of the show as well, Terence Stansbury, who was a guest on my podcast back in episode 58. You actually coached Terence for a couple of seasons at Temple, so we'll get into that a bit later on, but Terence helped us connect, so thanks to him for that as well.
Good, thank you. He's a good guy.
Yeah, true. Now, when you were a boy, what sort of sports or hobbies were you interested in before basketball became your number one priority?
So back in those days, there was no organized sports per se. Living in a small town, in a row house, as we call them, double-deckers, you had your lots, you had pickup games, whatever was in season, and then slowly things get a little more organized. Babe Ruth League came in, the Little League came in. Generally speaking, everyone back then just pretty much met at a park, met on a lot, as we call it.
Mm-hmm.
You play. It was not that much organized activities.
Were you playing basketball particularly during your childhood?
We had a basket at the end of the street. I just liked the activity of it. Was on like the high school team. It was just play. September, October, they went down and played two-hand touch, sometimes tackle football. And then, the basketball season would come in. You try to play it till it got dark. So it was more of a spontaneous activity thing. We had our bicycles, we had our roller skates, but we didn't have the organization, the presentation as there is today, which I think is both good and bad.
I've been doing quite a bit of research prior to our chat today, And thanks to the wonders of the internet and Google, I found a 1989 LA Times article which was written by Scott Howard Cooper. He mentions that you entered the coaching world almost by accident at Bishop Eustace High School in New Jersey. What events actually led to you becoming a head coach of a high school team at just the age of 21?
Well, a friend of mine, we were all going to school part-time due to economics, getting your grades up. Like St. Joe's College in Philadelphia had some part-time classes. Temple University was a huge source. So one day he said to me, "You know that new high school over there?" I said, "Yeah, well," because I had graduated in 55. High school had opened in 1954, but it was like no one even knew anything about it. So he said, "I have basketball, and I think they need some help over there with like the JVs." So we didn't have any activity to do.
Mm-hmm.
So he went over, coaching, layup lines, shooting drills, etc. And then the guy ups and leaves the school like in 1959 or 60 in January. And the poor priest they didn't know anybody to go and get.
Right.
It's like you inherited the job, and then, you got a little taste for it, and then you wanted the job, and you didn't have a college degree. The priest in charge, he took a chance, and we took advantage of it, my friend and I. And then, one thing led to another, and meeting, greeting people, and then in going to Temple University part-time, that in the hall there, they call it South Hall, with my mentor, eventually coached Harry Litwack, coached Temple. You could walk into practice. I just sat there and further got hooked, and then started going there more frequently, and then going to University of Pennsylvania with Jack McCallum, who was the general manager for the Bad Boys.
Yes.
He let you come in and watch practice. Eventually taught me the zone. And then Dr. Jack Ramsey, he allowed high school coaches to come in. So it was more on the site learning because I hadn't played like for a coach. So if you played at Carolina, etc., the odds are you're going to use the Dean Smith system or even the Dr. Jack Ramsey system. I had no system.
Some of those great names that you've mentioned, were they all part of or at least associated with what's called the Big Five in Philadelphia?
Yeah, in Philadelphia, they started about 1956. Wow. The five schools, instead of competing against each other, like Temple had a game, and maybe LaSalle would have a game on the same night, they brought themselves together and played about 80% of their home games in the Palestra, which is on the University of Pennsylvania campus, and maybe the others on your home court. So it became a very dynamic, and it's the only city, I think, in the world, I know in the United States, where five colleges got together to create this mythical conference.
Yeah, I've certainly heard about it and talked about it in previous conversations with other guests, but it sounds like it was an incredible time that these sort of things were starting to spring up and it was starting to happen. So it's very fascinating in that regard. So in terms of your high school coaching career, it wasn't too long before you started enjoying some really great success. And I think in the early 1960s, you guided the high school team to a state championship.
Yeah.
How do you think you're able to achieve such great success so quickly?
Well, I'll give you two reasons. One is my friend who stopped coaching was a baseball umpire. He knew the school system. So he knew grammar schools.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did was he went out and watched them play in their own little cubbyholes or gym and said, I think you can go see this kid. I'm sitting there like in 1960, 61 with some players. And all of a sudden, we got strong interest in the high school because it was the first at that time and the only all-boys high school in Jersey or, South Jersey area. So that was unique. And then the zone defense, which was taught to me by Jack McCallum and part of it by Harry Litwack, stymied the other teams. I didn't really know what we were doing. I know I just taught it as it was taught to me.
Right.
And it became a very formidable defense. And in a nutshell, that's it.
You mentioned the legendary Hall of Fame coach, Harry Litwack, and how you were going to some practices even when he was at Temple before you even went there as an assistant coach. How far back did your link to Harry go? Like, how many years into your high school career coaching was it before you crossed paths with him?
Very quickly, within the first year.
Okay.
Because I was on campus there and watched these guys coach. You just got caught up in it that, you can do this. You can only do it. The mentor's teaching you how to do it. Because, again, if you're not a player and you're not exposed on the court to a daily practice by an outstanding college coach, you're at a deficit. So I had to make up that deficit by going everywhere in the Philadelphia area to get that particular feel. And then, fortunately, as you guys have in Australia, we have always an outstanding, legendary high school coach. And the guy that I latched onto had retired. So between he and his details and drills, etc., putting in the zone and other aspects, learning from the Big Five coaches, I became head of the high school coaches because back in those days, you just coached. I mean, clinics weren't available. They didn't have BCRs. So everything that you learned in those days was on site.
Yeah, incredible. Okay, so as we were talking about with Harry Litwack, he contacted you about joining Temple as an assistant coach, and we're talking roughly around 1964. I read a great article that Bob Ryan wrote where it mentions that Harry was much more than just having him as a head coach. He was a mentor for you for decades to come, really. So do you mind just talking about when did you actually get asked to join Temple and how quickly you made that decision to leave the high school scene?
Well, it was in 1966, coming off a good year. Let me go back again. We won that state tournament you're referring to.
Yes.
That was like Group B. The school became so popular that we went to Group A the following year.
Okay.
And the following year, we won the state championship again in Group A.
Wow.
The history of New Jersey and everywhere, it's the first time that a high school went from a lower ranking as a state champion to a higher ranking and win the state championships.
Yeah, remarkable.
You got to think it was easy, but it was zone, even today, zone. That's why Syracuse survives, is the concept of how to attack the zones is very limited, even today. And that's, propelled us back in those days.
Harry Litwack, from what I've read, he was at the university for close to 40 years, and he's obviously since passed away, sadly. He was age 91, inducted into numerous halls of fame. In 1969, while you were an assistant with Temple, you won the NIT championship, defeating Boston College, which were coached by the great Bob Cousy. So what are your memories of that season and the run through the NIT final there and even going up against Bob Cousy at that time?
Well, one of the bigger wins was against the University of Tennessee. Then, not to go refer to what you'll bring up again about Tennessee, is the fact remains that it was a very good team. I think three of them, you have to think about this, 1969. Two of them got drafted into the NBA. John Baum and a big kid named Ed Mass that played with Phil Jackson at the Knicks. And the third was drafted into the ABA. Now, we're talking about maybe, you probably know better than I am, maybe 14 teams in the NBA then?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And these kids got drafted. And here's the other interesting part of that season. There were 20 teams in the NCAA. Only 20. And there was 20 in the NIT. So through the whole postseason process in 1969-70, there was like 42, 44 teams in the whole country. So the NIT had a formidable challenge because, the one-and-done schools, you lose and, you're out. It was a very good tournament. And Coach Litwack orchestrated it with his calmness, his presence. But again, the zone took over. We got shots off the zone on breaks or quick ups, we called them. And Coach Litwack, it was a magical moment for him. Because again, the first NIT game, 1937 or 39, Temple won.
There you go.
Litwack came up with a strategy. There was a great shooter, Hank Lazzetti, I think, or something like that. He came up by playing him man for man, and the other 4 guys playing zone, which is called the box and one, which he invented. So, it was a magical tour.
You've got it exactly right. I've just gone to the basketballreference.com website and checked out the 1969-70 NBA season. You're right, 14 teams. So you've got a great memory there. Now, in 1973, you became the head coach of Temple. At what point did you know that the handover was going to happen, and what were you feeling about the opportunities that laid ahead?
Well, it was so folksy would be the word, Philadelphia, that, guys, assistants or freshmen either moved up the ladder or went to another Big 5 school. It's a very provincial, back then parochial town. The coach, Harry, the chief, he started getting ill, and he had this virus or whatever that he just couldn't shake. And he was really struggling the last year or so, to the point that we couldn't recruit because we couldn't leave the court. I was his only full-time assistant.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And so you have to think about how these things have evolved. I don't know what all these guys do anymore, but so now, you're kind of locked in. His payback for all the work that I did as his only assistant was, I don't think he was going to retire until he had assurances that I would have the job. And that's the kind of man he was. So when it happened, we had a good team left over, but behind that, there was no recruiting. And the first 2 years, after the first year, we went to tournaments. We were like 8 wins, 10 wins. And then the recruiting classes we got in, and then we start moving back up again. But it was a struggle.
I did read somewhere amongst the research that I was doing that Coach Litwack was very ill, as you alluded to, and his consecutive streak of coaching games came to an end for at least one game where you were then thrust into the head coach position for that particular game. So obviously it sounds like he had you well and truly prepared for that when that actually would ultimately happen with the handover anyhow.
I don't know if you're not prepared. It's that 16 inches moving over to that seat. All assistant coaches, it's not a guarantee you'll be a good head coach.
Yep, sure. That's true, I suppose.
I'd like to roll after a while more as an assistant coach in the NBA with a young coach. Not that I didn't, because every team you got was a bad team because you're sitting there and the head coach gets fired. It's not like you're sitting like Tex Winter, the Chicago Bulls and, all that, or Chuck Daly with the Sixers. So you're ready, but you got to go through it, and it's not easy. It's not automatic.
So you coached the Temple Owls through to the 1982 NCAA season, and you led them to a record of 151 wins and 94 losses overall. So almost 62% winning percentage, which is fantastic. Early on, though, in your head coaching tenure, you were involved in a very memorable game.
Yeah.
It was played in mid-December of 1973, a regular season tournament called the Volunteer Classic, and pretty sure it's the lowest scoring game since 1938. Temple lost the game 11-6 to the Ernie Grunfeld-led Tennessee Volunteers.
Oh, Ernie and Bernie.
Was Bernard King there as well?
Oh, it was ridiculous.
I thought it was the next year. There you go. Do you mind just talking about the unique scoreline?
We didn't have the advantage of scouting at that much. And all of a sudden, they went into a 3-2 zone as we were. We said, Jesus, these guys are huge. At that time, they put in that 28-foot line marker in college, on the sideline coming in, and they did everything to avoid the clock. So it was 5 seconds here, breaking the plane and all that. So we said, well, let's see if they'll come out and play defense, because what people don't realize, it's a two-way game. The offense is obligated to get the ball up in 10 seconds. So once they cross half court, what's the defense supposed to do?
Because this was prior to the advent of the shot clock.
Oh, yeah. And this is one of the reasons why I think the shot clock is good, because got to a standoff, and I don't think coaches should be able to control that. But here is again, if the offense has to get it up, and we zone pressed them a few times, then you get cross half court. So the onus is on the offense all the time? Now, I didn't know that at that time. And so, the unwritten rule of John Bond and Claire B and those guys, you get that ball up. Then where does the defense come in? So for them to allow us in their own gym to do something that we didn't even know what we were doing. Never did it before, never did it again. We're past it. People were screaming, for them to sit there and let us do something that was, spontaneous, turned out to be pretty interesting, but don't put the onus just on the offense. The offense is obligated to get the ball up for 10 seconds. Then what happens? Defense can they sit down on the floor? Where does the defense come in?
Yeah, no, you raise a very valid point there. It's certainly a unique circumstance and situation.
We did our responsibility. So that means that because they play zone, that we have to play zone offense? To be very honest. What I just said was nowhere's on our mind. We got sucked into it so far ourselves that we couldn't get out of it. That wasn't the purpose. Why is it always on the offense to initiate the play after they get the ball up? Now it's 8 seconds. It's a quid pro quo game, but at that time, with no clock and staring these people down, it became very exciting. But for the fans, come on.
After the game, Tennessee put on a intra-squad match to satiate the fans.
Yeah, because the president came down and made him do it. It's Wayne Harden, the great coach at Temple. He said, the only thing you didn't do, you didn't win the game. It was 11-6 we won. We were within 2 points or 3 points, with 3 minutes to go.
Mm-hmm. Incredible circumstances. 40-plus years later, it's sort of a fascinating thing, and I saw it and thought, wow, I have to ask you about that. So I'm glad that I got your side of it. Thank you. In 1977, you were regular season champions, from what I understand, and then in 1978 and 79, you had 24 and then 25 wins respectively, and you also were named the Coach of the Year for your district on both those occasions. And also took the Owls to the NCAA tournament in 79. So do you mind just talking about the rise of Temple as you got towards the late 1970s and how the program was progressing overall?
Well, Jimmy Maloney, who has passed, who a very good coach, coach with Lefty and George Raveling at Maryland, very good recruiting. He really opened a lot of doors. Now, we had to go in and seal them. So we started getting recruits in, both locally and strong. And again, we got smarter. Went to Lute Olson about his stack offense. Hubie Brown helped us a great deal. Dr. Jack. So we were still, learning from the guys. Chuck was giving us what went on in the league. So we got better as coaches. The zone still was terrific for us. We just kept on pushing on. It's a proud period.
You just mentioned some incredible names there along the way, just in passing, which fascinating to hear that how many different greats that you've been associated with over the years, and this predates even your entry to the NBA. So, as I mentioned in the open to the conversation today, you coached Terence Stansbury during his first 2 seasons at Temple, which were your last 2 with the Owls, and in that time, the club made back-to-back appearances in the NIT, and also I've learnt that you travelled to Tokyo and played in some of the NCAA's first official regular season games held overseas. Do you mind just reflecting on those last couple of seasons at Temple and even your relationship with Terence, who's obviously a former guest and friend of the show?
We got put on to Terence late in the year. Delaware was not a very heavily recruited state.
Mm-hmm.
When we saw Terence and one of his teammates they used to call him the gold medal tournament, put on by the city of Philadelphia and Delaware. We looked at him, we said, no one's on to this kid, even though it's late. USC was, because the coach from out there knew him when he was in L.A., and we recruited him very hard, and he opened up the door for us in Delaware. We had 2 more outstanding players, not as good as Terence. And then Terence came in and just lit up the program. Very good player, very loyal person. and a very reliable player, worked very hard, particularly on his shot. With him on board, many, many good things started to happen. It was sad to leave that team because it was a very good team. We won 19 or 20. We were in the NIT. Now, you have to remember now, back in those days, there was no big leagues. That only one team from Philadelphia went to the NCAA. There's never been two teams from Philadelphia going to the NCAA. We had a lot of NIT appearances. Either we didn't win the playoff game or, whatever. The only other team that always would go would be Penn or Princeton because the Ivy League champion was an automatic bid. It was no downsides because we went to the NIT, but Terrence really put us in position to be in the NCAA and the NIT.
That's great to hear. Love it when you're able to reflect on a particular player's impact. Now, we're talking about mid-July of 1982, and you just talked about how you left Temple to join the NBA, and you were going to join up with a friend of yours who's the then Chicago Bulls coach, Paul Westhead, as the team's first assistant. Was that the first time that you received interest from the NBA, or did it date back to earlier?
It wasn't an NBA, but we had guys from Philly that went in, like, Jack McCallum, went from St. Joe's to Milwaukee Bucks as assistant.
Yep.
To the Portland Trailblazers and then to the Lakers as a head coach. Jimmy Lynam was in there. Chuck Daly was in there. When the new president came into Temple and he was like, I don't know, we may need all new people here, which is ridiculous. That kind of led to be with Paul in Chicago. Because I had never moved. I didn't go away to school. I wasn't in the service. I was like a typical Philadelphia Irish Catholic that would move 6 blocks from his house.
Yeah.
And then joining to go there. And then Paul runs into Rod Thorne, and we had no patience with him. Lost. And there we go. And the following year, Jimmy Lynam brings me to San Diego. So I went from Philly to Chicago to San Diego all in 1 year and never had been anywhere but the Philadelphia area. So it was a cultural shock as well.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I did read in some of the articles about you as well that the Temple president, I can't say his surname, but I'll probably butcher it, but his first name was Peter.
Leokouris.
Oh, Peter Leokouris, there you go. And I read a few stories about how he reportedly wanted to just change things up. Interesting as well that you sort of brought that up as well. How was that experience working with the Bulls for that 1983 season? They went 28-54, and as you mentioned, not long after there, you linked up with Jim Lynam and went to San Diego. But what did you make of the first year in the NBA and the difference between that and college?
Shocking.
In what ways particularly?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a wider lane, quarters versus halves. We're talking about illegal defense because the NBA, is even today so marketing conscious about scoring that they're the only league in the world from CYO to look that restricts defensive tactics. You can't play full man. They got the 3D rule. So the illegal defenses was very difficult for me because they were just hard to learn, saying, you can't do this on defense. Well, why can't you? Well, because, we just don't think you can do it. That's what's still going on today. You have all these layups and all this other stuff. However, when the Olympic team gathers in Chicago, they can play any defense they want. The opponents can play any defense, and it doesn't harm the game. It makes more movement to get those players out of the lane.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's isolation at the elbow with LeBron. Just guys like sitting in the corners. If you help, you can't recover. So, you have these monster rules that, was, very difficult for a pure college coach who haven't played to adapt to. And I found it difficult.
Yeah. Thank you for elaborating. I really appreciate that. Jim Lynam helped lure you across to San Diego Clippers for a year. And then you actually moved overseas and coached in Italy, from what I understand as well, for a few months before you returned back to the Clippers when they relocated to Los Angeles. So I know there's a bit to take in there, but how was that move to the Clippers and then briefly heading overseas to Italy and then returning back to LA?
Yeah, what happened was, we were here 1 year and the owner at midnight moves the team up to LA. How many times can I move the kids around? I was upset. And then they got like $125,000 to go over it. I'm saying like, what?
It's a great opportunity.
Yeah, it was. You know what? But again, I am at that time not a movable person. I don't know how you could describe it in Australia. That it was neat, great players, crazy fans and all. I again was struggling with the adjustment, culture, trying to learn the language. Then they didn't like me anymore. Fulfilled their contract, and when I came back, I got a call from Digger Phelps and said, in between, why don't you come out here right after Christmas and help us?
All right. Out at Notre Dame.
Yeah, so when I think David Rivers was a freshman around that time, I went out and spent about 4 months with Digger, which was really neat. And then Don Chaney brought me back when he was at the LA Clippers to be his assistant.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Well, I never had any idea about the Digger Phelps part there. I did follow your timeline pretty closely, but I didn't notice that happening. Appreciate you sharing that too. So when you were with the Clippers, you were an assistant with LA through to the 1988 season. And then in January of 89, after a 10-28 start, Gene Shue was fired. And then you took over as head coach for the rest of that season. And you took the injury-riddled Clippers to a 30-52 record in your first full season as a coach in 1990. I came across a great article from Jack McCallum in Sports Illustrated in February of 1990 about your Clippers and trying to make LA a legitimate two-team town. And there was a couple of great bits of info I'd love just to quickly relay onto you, then I'll get your response on that. The first one was that you said, and I quote, system-wise, tradition-wise, organisation-wise, coaching-wise, talent-wise, magic-wise, the Lakers are just better than everybody else. Need any other reasons? So I found that to be a great quote. And the second thing was that McCallum wrote that during a preseason practice, you turned up in a grey T-shirt with a message that had in red lettering, "How am I coaching? Call 1-800-748-8000, which turned out to be the Clippers office number. There's some great little tidbits there. So how was it trying to make the Clippers relevant in a city that's dominated by the Lakers?
Well, you really couldn't compete. Those that were coming to the games were NBA fans that couldn't get Laker tickets. They wanted to see the other teams. As you were trying to develop a fan base, the ownership was, as you were exposed to lately, was bizarre, but it was the NBA. You're not going to say the owner's crazy. He did sign your paycheck until the phone rings and somebody asks you to go somewhere else. You are where you are. We made the best of it. We didn't have any central practice facility because the sports arena was also being used. Then George Raveling and the Trojans. So you just plowed through it, existing as every other coach. Then and still, until the new coach came in, new owner, that you joined the club of being fired. Fortunately, Chris Ford became the Celtic coach. I tried to recruit him for Coach Litwack at Temple. Stayed in touch with him throughout the summertime. When he got to the job, I quickly called. We talked. I went up and talked with everybody else up there. Now I found out what basketball heaven was.
Yeah, well, you went from one absolute extreme to the other. It was incredible.
I mean, I didn't know how franchises operated.
Mm-hmm.
Met Red Auerbach and Dave Gavitt and Jan Volk, all those people involved with the Celtic organization over the years. I mean, it was like in cruise control.
Just a stark contrast. And you mentioned just a moment ago as well how when you were at Temple, you were trying to recruit Chris Ford. So your links back to Chris go back decades.
Oh, yes.
What were you aware of with Chris and how close was he to actually coming to join Temple?
If we were second, it was distant. He lived in the city of Atlantic City. Villanova campus was a respite for him. Around 67, or maybe even before I went to Temple. He was a freshman on a team that was 0-25 in high school.
Wow.
And he played well. From there, I followed him. And then when I went to Temple, I was assistant there for 2 years. Tried to, get him to come play for Harry. He had enough urban in his system.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like 68. So he went to Villanova. They went to the Final Four. And he made a good choice for him. He would have helped us, but he did well by going to Villanova.
It's really fascinating that these links that you can establish back decades prior can actually then come to fruition so much into the future.
Yes.
And of course, you end up being on the coaching staff there with the Celtics after leaving the rabble, I guess it was, the Clippers, with respect. But you spent 6 seasons with Boston, and then in 1991, you were part of Chris Ford's coaching staff that got the call for the All-Star game, as the Celtics had the best record at that stage in the season.
Yes.
The game at Charlotte. What was that experience like, being part of the All-Star game back when, in my opinion at least, the All-Star game mattered?
I think I was still in post-traumatic syndrome from the Clippers.
I'm not surprised.
I couldn't believe it. We had a private plane, MGM Airlines, because of Bird's back. Flew down there. We had Jordan. The league screwed us because we had no point guard. So we quickly put in a 2-guard front. And ended up, with Magic and all the loaded people they had in the West, we ended up beating them. I don't know. It's like shock. You went from where you were to now you're in the All-Star game.
Yeah. Did it feel like it was a great sense of recognition for you, or it didn't really pop up on your radar like that? You were just happy to be a part of the coaching staff? You've gone through a lot to get to that point.
I think it was because the Celtics were so grooved in because of Bird. See, Bird's theory was when we win, everybody wins. The parking attendants, the vendors, the coaches. Everybody wins. So it was of that mentality because I don't know how to describe it, but it was an amazing adventure from where you've come from to where you were.
I mentioned earlier, Jack McCallum wrote a great book, Unfinished Business, detailing your 1991 Celtics team and that season. What do you recall of his time around the team and then your involvement with McCallum in general?
I knew Jack a little bit because he's from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I didn't know him intimately. But while he's doing a lot of book research, he lived with me in Boston.
Oh, right.
Because I was by myself. And my wife's back here with the kids. To save him money. He was then maybe doing outlining, I guess. I didn't know exactly, what his full purpose was. But he stayed with us for a while into the second round with Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
I came up with this book that we weren't finished yet. He's a very clever writer. I reread it every once in a while, to bring back memories.
And how do you feel when you reread the book?
Yeah.
Did it bring back some wonderful times, or do you sort of rue what may have been, had Larry's back not given away, or what do you make of that?
It's like, I was there. I was part of the book. So was a lot of people, but it's like going back to maybe to your high school yearbook, remembering good times. And it's neat. I just hope my grandkids, read it and somehow Google and identify the Celtic mentality, the old garden, red and all. It's a very, very unique time.
Definitely is, and I appreciate you opening up about it. Before we started recording today, we were briefly chatting about the 1991 playoffs. You mentioned the series against Detroit in the second round, but in the first round, the Celtics played the Pacers in a 5-game epic series. We were talking about one of the gutsiest performances in playoff history when Larry Bird came back from the fall on the parquet floor at Boston Garden in Game 5.
Yeah.
The in-outer coach at that stage was Bob Hill, who's a good friend of the show. And in episode 14 of this podcast, we chatted about that series as well. I'd just love to hear your observations watching from the bench when you see Bird go down and get injured, and then what happened during the halftime break, what was said, what was happening around that time.
We never saw him at halftime. He was in the training room.
Did you think he'd be back for the second half?
Yeah, he came back maybe 5 minutes into the third quarter. The thing is, the word concussion then did not have the same meaning as concussion does today.
Sure.
Maybe he wouldn't have passed the protocol test they have today, so he wouldn't be in danger if he got hit again. But it was a great series. Talking about Reggie Miller, Chuck Person. It was a battle. Bob ran good stuff. He loved to run back screens. He got Reggie open a great deal. But Reggie Lewis did a good job on him. Yeah, we played up to the demands of the game.
What do you make of Chuck Person? He was obviously not shy to say whatever he felt like saying on the court, and he usually could back it up in most instances, but him and Bird were going back and forwards throughout the series. What did you make of his performance in that series, and what do you make of Chuck?
He was a guy that you would love to hate.
Yeah, true.
I mean, who the hell does he think he is? What? I'm looking in my mind right now. and looking in front of our basket at the Garden, and Reggie is up on top of the circle with the ball, and Chuck is like to the left. He may have been at that time, and I would go back to the Synergy tapes or whatever, one of the best catch and shoot. I mean, he would get that release off. You're caught between two devils. But Chuck, I'm going to say he averaged 25 or 30 in that series.
Yeah, he was a man possessed. He was on a scoring spree. I think he had a one quiet game, but overall he certainly broke out and put on a great show for the Pacers.
And they didn't like each other. It's amazing. But now I think Chuck Persons works for Bird at the Pacers.
Yeah, it's incredible how things can change over time, isn't it?
That was a battle. That was a battle of words, deeds, and shots.
Great description. What do you remember when Larry Bird came out from underneath the bowels of the Boston Garden, the reaction from the crowd? You knew, I guess, at some stage he'd be coming out.
I think Bob and those guys thought it was like a grand performance stage. We had no idea as coaches what was happening. I don't know if Chris went into the locked portion of the training room. So we just opened it up and played, and then he came roaring out and came to the bench and said to me, "Move over." He sat down, and he went back in.
I love it. That's fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing these memories. It's much appreciated, and I'm sure our listener would just revel in hearing these as well. Now, you left the Celtics to take up an assistant role to head coach John Calipari at New Jersey in the 96-97 season, and you were the team's head coach for part of the lockout-shortened 99 season and then coached all of the 2000 season. Now, a couple of other former guests and friends of the show, Jim McElvain, who was on episodes 39 and 40, and Kendall Gill, episode 42, when I mentioned to them that I'd be chatting with you today, they had nothing but kind words to say about you. I'd just like to know what your take was on, first of all, moving to New Jersey and being under the first-time head coach in the NBA, John Calipari, who's obviously done some great things in college, plenty of great things since. What was that transition like from the Celtics to the Nets?
Well, you know who instigated it was Bob Hill.
Oh, really?
Bob Hill talked me into it. N.L. Carr was the coach, and I've been there 1 year, and he could feel that we're a little bit on shaky ground. John was, kind to me, but Bob set it up. The problem there in New Jersey was the ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And then John, they put so much, I don't know how to word it, like he was the savior, like the loaves and the fishes. I mean,
yeah, he was heralded, wasn't he? Yeah.
All that bit, it was dumb. It was dumb to over-promote him and then raise controversy. Again, when you get, strong-willed players who think coaches are, okay, we've seen a few here before, like the Jason Williams. You can't come in and coach it like a college team because Pitino, Jay Wright, Cal, they are the program.
Mm-hmm.
They bring the players in. When you come into the NBA, you have no control of the schedule. 90% of the players are already there. Now you can start, doing this and that. And you have no control over the officials. So, you've got to make a very, very quick adjustment. Cal made the adjustment well in the second year and they went to the playoffs.
Mm.
And then, everything started coming down. One of the owners I knew, named Louis Katz, who tragically passed a year and a half ago in a plane crash. I knew him, but I've lived in San Diego for 23 years. I didn't know him.
Yep.
But Cal got a little shaky. Louis Katz and the others. They didn't make things comfortable for anybody. One of the owners came up to me and said, "We want you to be the eyes and ears for us." I said, "It doesn't work that way." The head coach brings you in to just a salary and keeps you.
Yep.
And they got all annoyed with me. Cal thinks the opposite. But it really ended up as a mess. Sad.
No, I appreciate you opening up about it too. You mentioned the 1998 playoffs there. You were coaching up against Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls in that first round. Now, even though they won the series in a sweep, the series was a lot closer than a lot of people probably remember in hindsight. Game 3, it was a bit of a blowout in the end because Jordan had a great performance at New Jersey. But what was it like to try and stop Jordan as a coaching staff?
Yeah, it's hard. It was hard because of the illegal defenses. That's another reason why the triangle went so well. Not so much, I'm not putting down the concept of it, but you couldn't help. They utilized the floor very, very well, besides the concept of the triangle per se. Sherman Douglas had a great playoff series.
Yeah, he did.
If he didn't, we wouldn't even be close. It was a matter, and I think it was a 3-game series.
Yeah, it was. You mentioned Sherman Douglas. I think at the end of game 1, Sherman almost hit a 80-foot shot at the buzzer to win the game at Chicago, and then it went to overtime and the Bulls hung on to win. But, Sherman had a great series too.
No one, including Cal's former assistant, said you can't win because Sherman can't score. Well, Sherman can score, and he can play. Sherman Douglas and John Bagley, if you want to go back in names, are two of the smartest point guards that got other people heavily involved. He got McCallum involved. McCallum wasn't a pure offensive player, but he got him a lot of touches.
Great shot blocker too.
Sherman Douglas may be one of the smartest players that I've been around.
And Sherman and John Bagley had similar sort of stature as well in terms of their build and appearance as well, just for what it's worth.
They hit the post right on time. They're good play callers. Now, Sherman Douglas should be in the league coaching somewhere.
You make a great point there. Now, I mentioned Jim McElwain, of course, and Kendall Gill because they obviously were on your New Jersey Nets teams in 1998 for Kendall and then 99 and 2000 for Jim and Kendall as well. But they had some great words to say about you behind the scenes before we got recording today.
Well, they were very hard-working players. Kendall, and Jim, and others. When they showed up they crossed that white line, they played.
All about the competitive spirit. Since retiring from the NBA in 2000, you've done a wide amount of things. You've been the vice chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports. You served as vice president of the NBA Coaches Association. I read that you also worked with Team USA to help them prepare for the 2008 Olympics. And I know you've got many other strings to your bow as well. What's keeping you busy these days? And do you mind just reflecting a bit on those things that you've been doing, Don?
When you get a little bit older, and I think maybe some older coaches there, it becomes a blur. Things move so quickly. Probably should have done more. Last year I was a consultant for the Lakers. Jimmy Iron and Byron asked me to come up. We had put the zone in a matchup, but they just didn't try it in games. And it puzzles me even to today because I think it would have helped them to some degree. But that was a good experience. But really, outside of doing Beijing, a little bit of basketball without borders, I haven't done as much as I probably should have.
You might be talking it down a little bit. I've read that you're a voracious reader. And you've also got interest in numerous things like gun control, animal rights, things like that as well. So obviously there's a lot of different aspects to your life that people might not know as much about that you certainly have a keen interest in as well.
I'm a liberal. And I like things besides just the game. I mean, I'm not linear like some people. Maybe that's good, maybe it's bad. I came very close to John Kerry when he was at the Celtics and senator. So he was my sponsor to become on the President's Council with Clinton, an appointee for, I think we were on there for 7 years. Of that nature, I mean, the gun society here is dangerous. You had 30,000 people last year killed via guns, not all gang-related, a lot self-inflicted. We're back like in somewhat the Wild West, and if you go back in history quickly in our country, Williamsburg, all the guns were in a locked gun cabin outside on the street. The bugle will sound, go get it and put it back because there was nobody walking around. And when you left Williamsburg and said, I'm out here, you got two of the muskets, one for hunting and one for home defense because you're out in no man's land. And we have taken that and made it such an extreme issue. Common sense, sense and sensibility. Why does one need an assault rifle that has a magazine of 12 in there? Are you going to get robbed in your house by, 10 people from an army? But that is the fear that they use here. And then it backs up. Now, I understand Australia is a little bit different with guns, aren't they?
Yeah, the gun control took a massive turn for the better here back in 1996. I think prior to Orlando, the recent tragedy there, Port Arthur here in Australia, where we had, I think there was 36 people maybe killed. There was a massive outcry, and our Prime Minister at the time, John Howard, actually, there was new legislation brought in, which there was a gun amnesty, and since then it's been an incredible switch from what had been prior. The gun laws here are very strict.
Well, you have to have a license to drive. You have to register your car. Cars kill people, and people driving in the car kill people. They say, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Your government's correct. You would think that before you could, buy a weapon, significance, that you would, have to take an NRA would sponsor you in a gun lesson or shooting range or, something how to, manage it. It's sad, but everyone has a right to some degree, but Thompson submachine gun in your house?
It leaves a lot of questions to be asked, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, that's another topic.
Yeah, definitely. But I appreciate you opening up on some of your interests and ideals behind the scenes as well, away from the basketball court. Just one last question I'd love to throw at you. I usually ask my guests, Basketball Digest had a great feature which was called The Game I'll Never Forget. Now, is there a game from your coaching career that stands out above all others?
Well,
it's asking a lot when you've got such a history in the game as you have.
That Pacers series. I don't even remember the Tennessee game anymore. I mean, it's such a blur. We didn't tape games back then. The high school championship games, first and second time around. Your question is a very good question. Eleanor Roosevelt had a good line. We don't deal, the Roosevelts here, we don't deal in memories. We deal in moments that create the memories. So those many moments that you possibly could reflect back on, there's so many of them that, you just feel happy that you can have those moments to try to recall and remember. So it's not really one particular aspect, I don't think.
Thanks so much, Don, for chatting with me today. It's been great to reminisce about your career and involvement with the game of basketball, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, I thank you, and I thank Terrence for initiating this, Kendall and all the others, and talk to Bob Hill again, give him my best.
I will, for sure. Okay, have a great night. What's left of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for listening. I welcome your interaction with the show. Suggest topics or guests you want to hear conversations with. Leave a voicemail. Simply visit inallairness.com/voice. Click Start Recording. Leave a message and press Stop. You can even listen back before submitting. Press Send and you're done. Time to share another fantastic review from a fan of the show. Thanks to Mahanik. I hope I've pronounced that correct. On the Australian iTunes store, it's titled Late to Find the Podcast. Brilliant stuff. And it reads, after exhausting all downloaded USA NBA podcasts I subscribed to due to a slow off-season, I thought it was time to see if any good Australian-based ones were out there. What a great surprise it was to find In All Airness. Adam greatly tests the memory banks of some entertaining, history-changing guests, including some rarely interviewed stars of years gone by. Working my way through every episode now, and favourite eps to date include Christian Leitner, Peter Vesey, Sam Smith, Iron Eagle, Steve Lepovsky, and the 1995 draft recap. Thanks for great listening, mate. Keep them coming. Thank you very much, Mahanik. If you are listening to this, please reach out to me and let me know who you actually are. Really appreciate the feedback, and it's great to get reviews from fans of the show. As of today, there are 3 more reviews that I'm still to get to. I'll get to those in future episodes of the show. 1 is from Brazil and 2 more from Australia. Worldwide, the show currently has 65 reviews, 62 on iTunes and 3 on Stitcher. Thanks for your continued support. If you add a review, as I do like to say, I'd love to read it out on a future episode of the show. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways that you can support the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please tell your basketball-loving friends about it. Your word-of-mouth recommendations are worth their weight in gold. You can subscribe to my show in various ways. iTunes, visit inallairness.com/iTunes. On Android, visit inallairness.com/Android. Add it to your Stitcher playlist, inallairness.com/Stitcher. You can also subscribe on Pocket Casts, Player FM, TuneIn Radio, other podcatchers, and of course, via the Podcasts app on your iOS device of choice. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter at inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.